Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Kate Russo. Kate, author of Superhost, grew up in Maine, but now divides her time between Maine and the UK. She has an MFA in painting from the Slade School of Fine Art, and while living in London, she worked with the theater group Love Bites, who presented two of her short plays, The Blind and Bernie's Night Off, at the Calder Bookshop Theater. She exhibits widely in the United States and England. Learn more about Kate at katerusso.com and at Russo Kate on Instagram. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
I know, it's so fun to have you. So,
Yeah.
Kate is in the UK. She does not have a copy of her book here. So, I am the official, Vanna White of books today. And here it is, gorgeous cover, Until Allison. So, tell our
Mhm.
listeners a little bit about Until Allison.
Yeah, Until Allison is it's the story of two girls, Rachel and Allison, who grew up together in the town of Waterbury, Maine. And they were, as young girls, they were very good friends. The sort of the two the two girls of Italian heritage in the town where they grew up, and so their parents got them together, despite like fairly different socioeconomic backgrounds. And Allison was bullied. Rachel was kind of bullied adjacent, and at some point decided that she, in order to save herself socially, she needed to lose Allison. And Allison eventually goes on to private school. They don't see each other for years, and then they reunite in college. Uh, they're at the same school, but they don't. Well, things ended badly in junior high, so they don't get along anymore. And the book goes back and forth between college and junior high. You know from the beginning that Allison has died, but you don't know the circumstances.
And I noticed in your acknowledgments, you say very clearly this is not autobiographical in any way, but you did lose a friend. It sounded like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would be a stretch to call her a friend, but
oh, somebody.
yeah, I lost a classmate when I was in college, who was murdered on campus, and it was my senior year, and I was the news editor of my college paper, which Rachel is as well in this book,
Yes.
and so Rachel has this incredible connection to Allison that she's had her whole life. I didn't have that with my classmate who died, but I did have to cover her murder. I did have to go to press conferences and try to figure out what happened, whilst at the same time thinking, oh my God, is there a murderer on campus? Like, who's
Right.
going to be, is there somebody else going to die too? And so it was,
Right.
this book is really kind of about that, more about the experience of
Yes.
trying to parse out sort of what's happened to her classmate, to Allison, whilst also dealing with the guilt of the past.
Right. Well, I thought so.
Yeah.
That was what I thought was really fabulous about the book is it took on the whole sort of murder in a really different way, right? This book
Hmm.
isn't really about solving the crime, although
Right.
that is a factor in it, but it is really
Hmm.
about parsing, and coming to terms with who you are as a young person in all
Hmm.
those kind of cringy moments where we do things we
Hmm.
know inherently are not nice that we would never want
Yeah.
to do to us, and yet, as you said, we do them as a form of sort of self-protection
Yeah.
against and I also love the fact that the relationships between these kids, particularly like Brad, for instance, who is
Hmm.
he's a big personality in junior high, and and how that develops sort of later in life. So
Hmm.
I want to hear a little bit about, did you know, and as I said, this is the first book of yours I've read, and
Hmm.
did you know kind of that you were going to tackle this in this way? And how did this, I mean, obviously, I would imagine that that seed was planted when you had
Hmm.
your own experience.
Yeah.
So how did it kind of come, how did you develop it?
Yeah, from really, I mean, absolutely, the seed was planted at that point. I had another friend on the newspaper with me at that time who was also taking a creative writing class that I wasn't in, and she said, "Oh, I've got a story due next week. I don't know what to write about." And I just sort of stared at her, and I was like, "You don't?"
Yeah, right.
Um,
Right.
and sort of from that point on, I just started thinking about, well, if I were going to tell this story, how would I tell it?
Right.
And later on, I went to art school, studied painting, sort of told myself I wasn't going to be a writer, that I was done with that. But this story kept coming back. And writing it was I actually consider myself more of a comedic writer.
Oh,
And my first book, Superhost, is much, much more in the realm of humor and awkwardness. And there's a decent amount of humor and awkwardness in Until
for
Allison
sure.
as well, but it's much darker.
Yes.
So it's kind of I it was a difficult place to go to because I didn't want to be that dark.
Yeah.
Uh, and and yet I felt that I couldn't not, um, because the story had just stayed with me.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
and when you talk about a young woman's murder, yeah, it tends to
yeah,
be. So that's interesting. So it wasn't the first book you wrote, which is, I
no,
mean, so it was a seed that was planted a long time. Did you think about
yeah,
writing it before you wrote Superhost, and it sort of got moved to the, how did that happen?
absolutely. So it was, I think probably maybe 10 years ago, I wrote a short story. And but it was one of those short stories that wasn't a short story. It was like 60 pages long. It
Yeah,
was like
right. Yeah,
word length.
right. Yeah.
And so I sort of put it aside. I tried to write a screenplay at one point.
Mhm.
When I was growing up, I was really, really in love with the movie Stand By Me.
Yeah.
And, and I wanted to do a kind of a female version.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was working on that. And of course, it was connected to the story. Uh, and again, I shared it with a few people, but it never gained traction. And I just stepped away from it, and I I wrote Superhost, which was essentially my career at that point was that I was cleaning Airbnbs,
Oh, wow,
really,
yeah.
really upset that my work was not taking off,
Right.
and decided to create a character who was in the same situation. So
I
that's
love
how
that.
that book
Yeah.
came about. But this one was always in the back of my mind. And then in COVID, Superhost was postponed. It was meant to be published right in the middle of COVID. They moved it. Um, and so I was just kind of sitting in my study, twiddling my thumbs, being like, okay, well, that book's not coming out for a while. What do I do now?
Right.
And it was just like, I mean, I couldn't ignore it anymore
Right.
because, there was nothing to distract me. And I just started writing it.
So I mean, so and I do love that. I also love that it goes back and forth between the past and the and and not to say I think obviously the way that Rachel and the other kids treat Allison
Hmm.
um is unfair in many ways, but also Allison has she really does sort of like not for whether it's her pride or the some misplaced sense of confidence, she really just doesn't let up, right? She
She
doesn't
doesn't,
and
she doesn't help herself
she
ever.
doesn't really help herself. I mean,
Yeah.
that obviously does not in any way
Yeah.
lead to her deserving to be
Yeah.
killed. But there are these moments when you just think, and I think her parent, like it also sort of displays the cluelessness of parents, right? I mean,
Hmm.
and I am a parent. I have parents. Yeah, it still
Hmm.
happens that you think, you look at your kids and you see them one way and you think, this is how their life must be going. And then when you get some
Hmm.
bit of information, you're like, oh my God, I had no idea. And it's,
Yeah.
oftentimes not until they're much older that you really understand what they're going through.
Yeah.
So such a lonely, hard time, particularly
Yeah.
middle school. So like what
Yeah.
a perfect slice of hell, right?
It really is. And my parents are quite a lot like Rachel's parents, in the book. They raised me to be very, I would say, almost cripplingly socioeconomically aware.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so there's a lot of that in this book. So it's flipped on its head because Allison is the far wealthier of the two girls, but she's the one who's bullied.
Yeah.
And that's something that certainly occurs in small towns in Maine. I don't know about the rest of the country or the world or how it works, but in Maine it's kind of I think I say in the book that you sort of have to have like, you can't be too poor and you can't be too rich. It's kind of
Yeah.
like a Goldilocks
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
And Allison's she just comes from a very wealthy family. Her father owns that big construction company in town, and
Right.
Rachel's the daughter of a seamstress and a teacher.
Right.
Uh, and they instill in her, what it means to be middle class in America. And in a lot of ways, all of their lessons, she's kind of too young to learn them when they teach
Yeah.
them to her. And
Yeah.
she's by age 13, she's carrying this enormous weight.
Right.
And by the time she's in college at 22, it's like so heavy.
It is so heavy.
Yeah.
And actually,
Yeah.
I do think it's really interesting. Like there's that one little, and it's just a beautifully sprinkled detail when they're at Allison's parents' house and the dad says something
Hmm.
about, are you, going to come help us? Basically like work summer crew to paint
Hmm.
houses, right?
Hmm.
And it's like it's just that moment of a little bit of sort of downward pressure on that.
Yeah.
And you just can, it's the first time sort of Rachel sees that dynamic with her dad. Because I think it's
Hmm.
one thing to sort of feel like you're that kid, but it's another to see your parents being treated
Yeah.
that way. And I thought that was really, really,
Yeah. When
powerful.
you realize that your parents, that first time you realize that your parents are uncomfortable,
Yes.
and then she realizes that it's her fault that
Right.
that that she's put them in this situation. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And there's another quote you meant we talked about a little bit before we started to record, which I
Mm.
really love, and it shows up, and you mentioned the acknowledgments. I think it's something one of your editors said, or
Yeah.
I want to talk about sort of that with the theme of the book, which is the quote is nobody deserves anything. So
Yeah.
tell us like, sort of where that came from and how that sort of feeds into the story for you.
Yeah, so it was my Sally Kim, my editor at Putnam, originally on the book. The first draft that she read, she called me. She had all her notes, and she said, book just reminds me that nobody deserves anything. And I wrote it down, and it became the first sentence
Yeah,
of the book, and it was an oddly therapeutic moment for me, to hear her say that, and then it really helped me figure out how to move this story along, because when you're dealing with a story that is not in any way factual, but it's these characters are dealing with guilt, like enormous amounts of guilt for the pain that they caused.
right.
And I think, God, I mean, I hope everybody does. I mean, I know I do. I feel enormous guilt for the things I did as a kid. And so she's carrying this weight, and it's like this is the forgiveness. And to say sort of nobody deserves anything. It's the flip of a coin. When bad things happen, you don't deserve that. But also when good things happen, you don't deserve that either.
Right.
Like it's we have to all just accept that things happen the way they happen.
It just happened. Exactly.
Yeah. And essentially that is the crux of why Allison dies, is that Rachel wants to believe that it's linked,
Right.
and that she is somehow to blame, even though
Right.
it makes no sense. But so you get that story. Yeah.
Not just from her childhood, right, but also from the
Yeah.
fact that, Rachel saw Allison with somebody the night she went missing.
Hmm.
So there's
Yeah.
also this like, and the idea, and that sort of that is interesting to me too. I think there is this sense that in hindsight, we can always be like, well, if I had done this or I had done that, and actually
Hmm.
it's, I love the character of the faculty advisor of the newspaper who is this sort of
Yeah.
calming like force about how like she's the adult acknowledgement that never really changes. We always feel that way, right?
Yeah.
That you
Yeah.
really we can hold on to those things, but they don't serve us. And then there's
Yeah.
the very end, the beautiful gift that comes from Allison to Rachel, which
Yes.
we don't do spoilers, so you have to read the
Yes.
book. But I think that is fun. And I love the fact that, of course, the way the first lines often happen, right, is the first line is often like almost the last thing written, right? It
Yeah.
comes through all this,
Yeah.
all the so you said you had two editors. Is that true?
Yeah, yeah. So Sally was on the book in the beginning, when she was at Putnam, and she's now off at running Little Brown. So Tarni, who was her assistant at the time, has now taken over, and really she was the one who said, there was it's always taken place in the newsroom. So a lot of the college scenes.
Yeah.
She was the one who was like, you got to be in the newsroom more. And so every editor has a different sort of take
Isn't that true? Yeah.
how to move it forward. And some people who read it really loved junior high the best, those scenes the best, and then others really loved the contemporary story
Yeah.
of the girls in college. And so it was about sort of meeting that balance
Yeah, yeah,
between the two.
I don't feel like one or the other overtakes the story. And I think that is a delicate balance because I think some of us are sort of more interested in that young person,
Mhm.
drama and the kids. And then, and some of us are, maybe more drawn to sort of what's going on when she's a little bit older. So,
Yeah,
did it change a lot? Did you write the book as as two timelines? I mean, I'm always curious to know sort of what were the biggest things that shifted
yeah.
between the first
There,
draft and what we're reading now.
yeah, there were so many
Yeah.
drafts of this book.
Yeah.
I think the very first one was so Professor Stannard, who's the one who's helping them through the paper.
Yep.
In an earlier draft, Rachel is in a class, a creative nonfiction class that Professor Stannard is teaching. And all of the junior high material in that draft of the book is written in essays.
Oh,
Um,
interesting. Yeah.
but what happened was that um, my editor, Sally, at the time loved Professor Stannard so much that basically within that version, it meant that she was never really had a scene. And so we just totally
Right.
just, and we got rid of, and it was so bulky because you had just so many you were taking big chunks of time out. And then there was another version where it was like one chapter on, off, junior high, college, junior high, college. Um, I mean, we tried everything.
Yeah, isn't that, I mean, it really,
Yeah.
sometimes it does take like, and I think it's always, I'm super grateful when I have an editor who's willing to like, no, this isn't quite it either. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Even though you're like, oh my God, I need to be done.
Yeah.
You're also like, thank you for making that. There is a little bit, they are in a writing class together.
Yes.
The two of them, it's not standard, I guess, but I love that. There's just this little dynamic of the way that they are together at college, right?
Yeah.
Because they don't,
Yeah.
like you said, they're not really friends,
Yeah.
and they're, and there's that retains the awkwardness between them,
Hmm.
from anyway, I mean, that's how it is, right? You go back to
Yeah.
where you grew up and you see people and you think, oh God, I don't, and then
Yeah.
there's the whole, of course, there's the boy, the boy that,
Yeah.
that and I love the I love the sort of resolution there too. So, so many wonderful things that was super fun. Tell us about your art because this is so. I mean, oftentimes I talk to tons of writers, but not very many of them are really multimedia to this extent. So,
Yeah.
what kind of art do you do, and where can people check that out? Because that's so
Yeah, I mean it's all on katerusso.com or sarahbouchardgallery.com, Sarah who represents me. It's all very abstract. My training is actually in color theory, which most people go, what?
yeah.
Uh,
You'll have to tell me what that means.
yeah, which is essentially just learning how color works, how you mix color, where it comes from, how light affects color, all of that. There's been a couple of really great books written in the past couple of years about color.
Oh, fun!
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah, it's and but these days the two worlds for me really they blend together well. So everything I do is fairly abstract, fairly pattern based.
Okay.
So once I've worked out what I'm doing, oftentimes what happens is I'm kind of writing and painting or writing and drawing at the same time. So I'll be working on a pattern on a drawing, but then I'll be like kind of writing dialogue in my head at the same time.
Interesting.
And then I'll sort of get up and go over and write that down, and then I'll come back and keep working. So it's a way to sort of stimulate my brain into kind of writing by accident because sometimes you can sit down and you think, I have
Oh,
no idea
yeah.
where this is going or what to say. I get up and I do something else,
Right.
and then
I do,
suddenly it's like,
unfortunately
yep,
for me it's like
yeah,
laundry, but I don't do anything that's so creative as art,
yeah,
but I agree
yeah,
with you. And it's interesting.
yeah.
I read a book by a Pulitzer Prize winner named Olin Butler called From Where We Dream about sort of the process of writing because
Hmm.
writing is one art where the thinking almost gets in the way, right? Like
Yeah.
because if you think too much about the words, it sort of like ruins the
Hmm.
magic of it. So there is that sort of you get into this sort of fugue state, if you
Yeah.
will, about when I mean I think that a lot of writers sort of understand what sounds crazy, but right,
Yeah.
you understand what I'm
Yeah.
talking about. And I can imagine that that doing the art, which requires a totally different part of your brain
Hmm.
and your focus really can bring that to the surface. How fun. Now, are they
Yeah.
related? I mean, like that's what I mean, not
Yeah.
they wouldn't
No,
be
I
necessarily,
mean,
but
really not at all. I mean, and that's kind of what I love about it is that one is a break from the other.
yeah.
Uh, my painting was, that was everything that I did up until probably about 10 or 12 years ago when I finally was like, okay, I'm going to write because I can't not.
Yeah.
But also at the time I was having, because the work is so detailed, so repetitive, I was basically getting repetitive strain injuries from trying to paint 10 hours a day,
Oh,
8, 10 hours a day. So that was kind of when I started writing, and I did it really for fun, just to give myself a bit of a break. And then I realized I mean, it was fun. It is fun,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I realized it wasn't for fun.
Yeah, you're right, right.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
sort of fun, but it's also
yeah,
there's a
yeah,
compulsion. I love that you said you started to write because you knew you couldn't not. And I think that's
yeah,
the other thing about writers is people are like, well,
yeah,
how do I know when to quit? I'm like, if you really, if you, the reason to know, the way
yeah,
to know is you can't quit. Like
yeah,
I took a
yeah.
year
It's not
off
an
of
option.
writing and,
Hmm.
and it was like, people were like, you're crazy. You need to go back and
Yeah,
do that thing. Even if it makes you crazy, you're less crazy with it than you are with it.
yeah,
It's true. I think
yeah.
that's true. So that's so fabulous. Okay, so are you working on, I mean, are you working on something now?
I am. Yeah, I'm about 200 pages into something right now. That yeah, I mean, who knows how long it'll take. But I'm having fun, and that's the
Good,
main thing.
good.
That's the best bit is when you don't know. For me anyway, I tend to write. This book was different. Until Allison was different, but generally speaking, when I write, I don't know where I'm going. Like I get to know my characters really well, and then I follow them and they lead me. Whereas with Until Allison, obviously, but when you're working within that sort of thriller framework, you have to know a little bit where you're going.
Yeah, you
Uh,
have at least you know that there was a crime committed.
yeah,
So are you back in Maine for this book?
I'm actually back in London for this
Okay.
book.
Okay, fine.
Yes, it's an expat book in London, so it's based on Americans in London essentially.
I
But
love
yeah,
that. And it sounds like Superhost was also was that
yes, that was
London?
that was London. That was London based as well.
I
So
love that.
I kind of go back and forth
Yeah, I mean,
in my writing as I do in my life, just sort of bouncing
yeah.
back and forth between the two. Yeah,
I was, before we started filming, I was saying how jealous I am that you get to be over there.
yeah,
I know the circumstances are probably aren't ideal at the moment, but, you're taking care of family, but it's,
yeah.
what a fun life. Do you feel like you have a studio set up over there as well as in Maine?
I have a great studio in Maine, and I don't have a studio here. So everything that I do here is the small stuff.
Yeah, yeah,
There's no painting that happens here. It's all drawing based stuff that
right.
happens over here. And then yeah, I've got the top floor of my house in Maine all to myself.
So,
My
yeah.
husband was so nice to let me have it, uh,
Yes.
because that put him in the basement, and he swears he's okay with that, but he's a good
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah. I
So
mean,
yeah, yeah,
good for him.
yeah,
Good for him to know exactly how to take care of his artistic wife. I love that.
yeah.
Well, tell everybody where to find you. It sounds like you're Russo Kate on Instagram.
Yes, I'm Russo Kate on Instagram. Somebody beat me to Kate Russo, so I am I am Russo Kate on Instagram. That is where I am mostly.
Yeah.
No Twitter or X or any of that for me. So find me, Russo Kate, absolutely, and then website is katerusso.com.
So exciting. So,
Yeah.
it was so fun to get a chance to talk about Intel Allison today. For those of you, are listening to us and not watching us, you have to go check out this cover because it
Mhm.
reminds me of their day. The pond, and then there's some
Mhm.
water. There's some lovely water scenes in the book that this draws out for me, and it's a beautiful.
Yeah.
The yellow is fabulous. It's super pops. So.
Black and yellow. I love it. Yeah.
Your little Bumblebee book. I love
Yeah.
it too.
Yeah.
So this was super fun. Thank you so much for joining me today, everyone. This was Killer Women with Kate Russo. I almost said Allison Russo. No, with Kate Russo, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.